There was a time when a Saturday morning in almost any American town sounded the same. Engines turning over in driveways up and down the block, the low rumble of a dozen cars idling in unison, and somewhere down the street, a group of men and women gathered around an open hood, coffee in hand, debating carburetors like it was scripture. This was the car club. Not a business, not a franchise, just a loose brotherhood and sisterhood of people who loved the same thing enough to build their lives around it. And then, almost without anyone noticing, it started to disappear. So what happened? Where did they go, and why did something that once defined entire communities quietly fade into the background of American life? To understand the fall, you have to understand just how enormous the rise really was. Car clubs exploded in the years after World War II, when a generation of young men came home with mechanical skills learned in the military, a little extra cash in their pockets, and a hunger for something to belong to. Hot rodding wasn't just a hobby, it was an identity. Clubs formed in garages and diners and drive-ins, each one with its own name, its own jacket, its own set of rules. The Igniters. The Renegades. The Road Kings. You'd see the names stitched onto satin jackets, painted onto plaques bolted to grills, printed on dance flyers for the fundraisers they threw to keep their events running. These weren't just groups of guys who liked cars. They were social institutions, as real and structured as a church group or a bowling league, complete with elected officers, membership dues, and strict codes of conduct. And that structure mattered more than people realize today. In the 50s and 60s, hot rodding had a reputation problem. Local news loved to paint young men with fast cars as dangerous, reckless, a menace to Main Street. Car clubs pushed back against that image deliberately. Many required members to maintain safety standards on their vehicles, to behave responsibly on public roads, and to represent the club well in the community. They organized charity runs, sponsored safe driving campaigns, and worked with local police departments to establish legal drag strips so kids would race there instead of on the street. In a strange way, the car club became one of the reasons hot rodding survived at all. It gave the hobby legitimacy. The clubs also gave people something increasingly rare even back then, a genuine sense of place. If you owned a modified car in a mid-century American town, you didn't have to go looking for your people. You just had to show up at the right drive-in on a Friday night, and you'd find them, leaning against fenders, trading stories, planning the next run. Membership meant something. You earned your jacket. You proved yourself at the track or under the hood before anyone handed you a patch. There was a hierarchy, a sense of progression, almost like a trade guild for gearheads. And when a club held its annual car show, the whole town would turn out, because for one weekend, that stretch of Main Street belonged entirely to Chrome and Thunder. By the 60s, car clubs had become so embedded in youth culture that they started shaping entertainment itself. Magazines like Hot Rod covered club activities like sports pages covered football. Local television stations broadcast club-sponsored races. Even music picked up the theme, with surf rock and hot rod songs celebrating specific cars and, sometimes, specific clubs by name. For a kid growing up in this era, joining a car club wasn't a niche interest. It was one of the most visible, aspirational things you could do. So if car clubs were once such a dominant force, what actually pulled them apart? The truth is, no single moment killed them. It was a slow accumulation of cultural shifts, each one chipping away at the foundation the clubs were built on. The first crack came from insurance and liability. As decades passed and lawsuits became more common, hosting group events, especially anything involving racing, got expensive and legally risky. Clubs that once organized their own drag strips found themselves priced out or shut down by liability concerns. Fewer sanctioned events meant fewer reasons for members to gather regularly, and the informal bonds that held clubs together started to loosen. The second crack was suburban sprawl itself. Car clubs thrived on proximity. They needed a drive-in, a diner, a stretch of road where everyone naturally converged. But as towns spread outward and public gathering spots like drive-ins closed one by one through the 70s and 80s, that natural meeting ground disappeared. People still loved cars. They just had fewer places to gather around them. Then came a deeper shift, one that had nothing to do with cars at all. American social life in general began quietly eroding starting in the latter half of the 20th century. Bowling leagues, fraternal lodges, civic clubs, church groups, all the organizations that once structured community life saw steady, sustained decline. Sociologists would later describe this as a broad retreat from communal participation, and car clubs were simply one casualty among many. It wasn't that people stopped loving hot rods. It was that fewer people were joining anything that required regular, structured, in-person commitment. Automotive culture itself was changing too. As cars became more computerized starting in the 80s and 90s, the shade tree mechanic began to vanish. You used to be able to pull an engine apart on a Sunday afternoon with basic tools and an intuitive understanding of how combustion worked. Modern vehicles, with their sealed components and onboard computers, made that kind of hands-on tinkering far harder for the average enthusiast. The skill that had once bonded club members together, the ability to build and modify a car with your own hands, became a specialized trade rather than a common language. And then, of course, came the internet. This is often blamed as the villain in stories like this, but the truth is more complicated. Online forums and later social media didn't kill car culture, they actually gave it a second life in some ways. Enthusiasts could now find each other across entire continents instead of just within driving distance. But that convenience came at a cost. You no longer needed to show up to a physical meeting to belong. You could scroll through photos of someone's build at midnight instead of standing in their driveway helping them install it. The digital version of community replaced a lot of the in-person version, and something intangible got lost in that trade. The shared sweat, the trial and error done together, the sense of earning your place among people who watched you grow as a builder, all of that thinned out. Economic pressure played its part as well. As the decades rolled on, the cost of restoring or modifying classic cars climbed steadily, pushing what was once a working-class hobby toward something closer to a luxury pursuit. Many of the original club members aged out, and their kids, facing different economic realities and different interests, didn't always pick up the torch in the same numbers. But here's the thing about American car culture. It has a stubborn, resilient heart, and it never actually disappeared, it just changed shape. Walk into almost any town today and you'll still find car clubs, they just look different than they did in 1958. Instead of hot rods and customs, you might find Jeep clubs, Mustang owner associations, Miata meetups, or classic truck groups organizing through Facebook and coordinating meetups at local parking lots instead of drive-ins. Cars and coffee events, those informal Saturday morning gatherings where enthusiasts bring their vehicles to a parking lot just to look, talk, and admire, have become the modern descendant of the old club culture. They've traded the satin jackets and formal dues for a more casual, come-as-you-are structure, but the core impulse is exactly the same. People still want to stand next to their car, next to people who understand why it matters, and talk for hours about something the rest of the world sees as just metal and rubber. There's something beautifully cyclical happening too. As original hot rod and muscle car club members have aged, a wave of nostalgia has pulled younger builders back toward vintage restoration. Car shows dedicated to preserving 50s and 60s era vehicles are seeing packed attendance, often from people too young to have experienced that era firsthand. They're chasing something they only know through old photographs and stories from their grandparents, and in doing so, they're quietly reviving the very culture the internet was supposed to have replaced. So did car clubs really disappear? Not exactly. They dissolved, scattered, and reformed into something less formal, less structured, and definitely less matching in the jacket department. The strict hierarchies and elected officers of the 50s gave way to looser, more spontaneous gatherings shaped by social media and shifting economics. What survived, and what continues to survive, is the underlying instinct that built those clubs in the first place. The simple human need to find your people, gather around something you love, and remind each other, one Saturday morning at a time, why it was worth building in the first place.